Good morning.
Hey, everybody. It is Friday, and we are so glad that you've joined us here at Rural Community Solutions, where we help you design family-friendly, youth-centered places that attract people who want to live in your community, join your economy, share their talents, maybe raise their families, people who are excited to live in your community. We're so glad that you're here. My name is Kim Spillers.
And I'm Frank Spillers, and turning off my phone. Sorry about that. And we're walking through the last couple of weeks. We're walking through really how do you make a startup community. Now, I think I better define startup community because it did come up, and this is the definition that we use, and it started. It's a definition from the book The Startup Community Way by Brad Feld and Ian Hathaway, and it's a great book. Whoops, forgot to do one simple thing here. So yeah, here we go. Okay, so it's a great way, but a startup community. Now it's not we're starting your community. Your community's already started, but a startup community is the foundation to build an entrepreneurial economy within your community. So the primary purpose of a startup community is to help entrepreneurs succeed. Bottom line, help them succeed. So always remember what a startup community is all about. Without entrepreneurs, okay, so without your entrepreneurs, and we can define entrepreneurs if you'd like, without entrepreneurs, there's no startup community. So if you are a community that just is a recruiting community, or you just want to create jobs and rely on large corporations or other corporations to move into your community and supply the jobs, that's not a startup community. A startup community is helping entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs create businesses. They look for opportunities, and they look for problems. Entrepreneurs, if you really get down to it, entrepreneurs look for problems. Then, because they are very creative, they don't look at the problem as a barrier. They look at the problem as something to be solved. How can I solve this to help people address this problem? That's what it is. So here's a problem, and an entrepreneur looks at it as an opportunity to solve, to help people. That's an entrepreneur. So if entrepreneurs aren't succeeding, the next generation will leave and entrepreneurs will stall. Entrepreneurship will stall. So a startup community is creating an environment for entrepreneurs to succeed.
And the reason that matters to your small community is because 98% of the jobs are created by either small businesses who are going to expand somehow to make your community better and build their business, or taking new ideas and making those into new jobs, new ventures, new businesses, new careers in your community. So anyway, it's a win-win, and that's what most of America is built on. So that's why we at Rural Community Solutions are just passionate about helping your community succeed. So we want to connect a few dots between the graphics that we have been showing you last week and this week. We have 4 pillars. That's what we talked about last week, our prosperity pillars of relationship, engagement, entrepreneurship, and collaboration. Now, the diagram that we use that displays this, a couple of them actually, for those of you on the podcast, we're showing several graphics. Might be a good idea to be able to go to the podcast or go to the video and look at this. But we wanted to make sure that we don't just have pretty colors on here, but they actually connect dots. So our relationship pillar is green, our engagement is yellow, our blue is entrepreneurship, and our red pillar is collaboration. Now, those are going to connect to very specific institutes that we're talking about this week, all week long at Rural Community Solutions. So just wanted to connect the dots that those colors mean something. They all connect with each other. So the yellow for relationship, or the green for relationships, is connected to our small community leadership Institute. Engagement goes with this Engagement Institute, the Small Community Engagement Institute. The Entrepreneurship was yesterday's show, and that is about connecting with your youth, getting them excited, hearing their ideas. And today we're going to talk about our Community Builders Institute, and that's where your communities get to collaborate with one another.
So collaboration is really, really important, and our Community Builders Institute is our fifth institute that we have talked about this week, and so all of our institutes they build upon each other. They can stand alone, but it's better to build upon each other. Now, remember, your community is going through a 20-year to 25-year process. And I'll tell you the reason why is because your community is like an iceberg. Right? And then the iceberg model has been used countless times over a whole bunch of different ways. So you understand what the iceberg model is. You have about 5% of the iceberg on top of the water, 95% on the bottom of the water. And that represents in some keynotes that I give, the 5% is your conscious mind and the 95% is your subconscious mind. And everything in your subconscious mind is everything you have learned over your entire life. It's automatic. It's how you view the world. It's your perception. It's your paradigm. It's all those key words of how it goes in there. In community and economic development, what we use the iceberg for in Rural Community Solutions is that 5% on top of the water is your community as you see it right now. Right? So you are looking at present day community, and that's where you're working. How do we solve present day problems looking at our present day community? And so that's okay, but it's very individual, it's very individualistic, and it's very short-sighted. And yesterday, I used that model of you're going to build a co-working space, or you're using your physicality to really increase your community. Well, that's short-term leverage, and it's not sustainable, and it's not long-lasting. What you want to do is create a process, create pillars within your community that will sustain you over the long term. And to do that, you need to get under the water and look at what 95% of your community has had happen to it, has been made up. What kind of culture do you have? Where did that culture come from? And that is then taken in our community builders process, because you need to build relationships. It all goes back to that first pillar of building relationships. Your first relationship building is within your community, amongst your own people. Your second relationship building has to be looking at your commuting region. Your commuting region is where your workforce comes from. So if you don't know where your workforce is coming from,
or going to,
look at your labor shed. All right. So yeah, your workforce can be leaving your community during the day and coming back. So that is all your labor shed, your commuting patterns within your community. Now, why are the communities important where your workforce lives? Or why are your community important where your workforce works if they don't work within your community? Because that is all part of your regional economy. So if you don't pay attention to those communities, if you don't pay attention to build up relationships with those communities, you're not going to have a strong regional economy. And those communities where your workforce lives might not be strong, and you will lose your workforce because they can't live there anymore. Remember, in this post-COVID world, or in the post-COVID world, we are finding out that more people are looking to where they want to live and bringing their jobs with them. I heard a statistic yesterday on a podcast I was on, or a webinar I was on. 40% of the workforce is now working from home. So how many is going to be working from home after this? Maybe about 40%, maybe a little less. It's not going to be the same because people are going to require to get back to work, get back to the office. But there's going to be some type of hybrid model out there that we are going to have more people working at home. You need to pay attention to those communities on where they're at. So keep in mind your regional concept, and keep in mind the relationship you have with those communities, all right? Because you need to build that up.
So if that demographic is interesting to you and you're not sure how to go about doing that, on Monday, we talked about our first institute, which is our Community Prosperity Institute. That has lots and lots of demographics to it, and commuting patterns is one of those demographics. So you can either go back to our Monday, April 12th episode, but that is the connection that Frank is referencing, is that commuting patterns are incredibly important. So what we have is our Community Builders Institute that's going to help you connect all those dots, connect all those people, connect those businesses, connect everybody in a super fun way. So Community Builders, actually, Frank helped to develop early in his career. It's a great, terrific process.
So let me tell you a reason why we want to use Community Builders and why it's so valuable to you is because if you look at the iceberg. Okay, here's an example of an ice. Oh,
God bless you.
Oh, excuse me. Oh, I couldn't find my mute button.
So sorry, and there may be another one coming.
So. Okay, so if we look at the iceberg model, here's what happens. Is that I worked with a community back in the early 90s. Okay, I worked with one community. And in 1 year, they had a forest fire. They were just on the edge of a forest, and so they had a forest fire, and it shut down their tourism business for the summer because it was a pretty big forest fire. It was a pretty long one. It burned for a number of weeks and until they got it under control. But it basically did ruin their tourism industry that year. Then they started up the following year, and then in the following year, so 2 years after the forest fire, they had a flash flood, a flood that started on a Friday night, wiped out their civic infrastructure. In other words, wiped out their park. They were building a golf course, volunteers building a golf course for a couple of years. They were going to open it that Saturday morning after the flood, and it wiped out half the holes. It was a 9-hole golf course, wiped it out. Wiped out one house, but it wiped out a couple of businesses too, but mainly just wiped out a lot of their civic infrastructure. And so I was put on the flood recovery team to go back and help them vision how they wanted to rebuild their community. And so I got about 300 people into the school auditorium one night, and we were having a brainstorming session. But, in a brainstorming session, everybody throws out these ideas and what can be done, and here's our idea, and it's just a lot of chit chat, a lot of chatter going on, a lot of ideas being thrown around. Well, in that room, you could have heard a pin drop. Nobody was talking, nobody was interacting with anybody. So we tried and finally we couldn't get any progress, and so we sent them home. And I said, I'll be back in 2 weeks. And in the meantime, I went and I talked to a state historian. And I asked the state historian, I said, what's going on with this community? I couldn't get them to interact with each other. And he said, Frank, I know exactly what's going on. And he said, and I said, oh, good. What was it? He said, what, 100 years ago? I said, how long? He said, 100 years ago. Now, this was probably about 120 years ago now. But 100 years ago, this community gave an award to their neighbor that hated their neighbor the most. And so in this community, they had a culture. 95% of your community, remember, is unseen, but it is unconscious behavior, and that's how people act. So they had a culture that they built of hate. I'm going to hate my neighbor more than anybody else. Now, I don't know how it started. It might have been a fun little activity with the Chamber of Commerce or the community club there. But this is a town of about 1,200 people. And so over the next 100 years, nobody would talk to each other. They couldn't communicate. They didn't know why, because there's been about 3 or 4 generations that have passed on this to other generations. And so in 2 weeks, when they all came back together again, I told them that story. And once I got done with the story of how they built their community of hate and their unconsciousness of hate, you could see actually their faces relax. You could also see them pointing to each other by saying, well, I was wondering why Grandpa wouldn't play with you or didn't like your family and wouldn't let me play with the kids. And we couldn't go down that street because of these people. Never could understand that, but now I understand it, and I think it's really stupid. And so they could stop believing and behaving in such a way that they understood what happens, and they understood why those walls were built up over time. And so we take communities of that aspect, and you think about the communities around you. Think about how you perceive them. Think about if you were born and raised in the community where you're living, think about how you perceive that community that you used to play sports with, or think about the community that maybe you were told snuck into your community at midnight and stole your county charter. So you aren't living in the county seat, you're living in the non-county seat, but you started out in the county seat. Somebody stole your charter. And so those perceptions of the past, those 95% perceptions of the past, it's all part of your culture, all part of your behavior patterns on how you perceive communities within your commuting pattern. And so we look at traditional regional development like this. Your community economy is separate from everybody else. And when you look at normal regional economies or regional development, your leadership, your economic developers, your Chamber of Commerce executives are all going to get together as one, because that's a silo that they all work together. So they're actually being paid to work together, to look at, or just to talk to each other. And so they sit around a regional or a community economy type of table. They bring their community to the table and they talk about their community economy. What can we do together? Oh, I don't know. Maybe we'll bring in a speaker. Maybe we'll do a workshop. Maybe we can just do something like that. So maybe once a month they get together, and then once every 6 months, they bring their boards together around just a learning or a educational process. That does nothing to do with building a regional economy.
Or to address culture.
It might help a little bit on your regional economy, but it doesn't necessarily do anything that's going to build relationships amongst the communities. It builds relationships of the professionals because they can talk common knowledge, and that's how that can be built. So really then the communities are very defensive and they're very protective over what they do, and that really starts to raise its ugly little head when you start recruiting industry. And so when regionalization starts to happen, right, communities are very defensive and protective of their territories. And then if you are building a recruitment strategy around that region, in other words, if we all come together, we can entice a larger corporation to live within our region. However, when it gets down to choosing the community where that happens, then some of the jealousy starts to raise its head. Why does that community get the business? They always get everything. Why don't we get it? How come you chose that? You have the money, you have the county seat, whatever that region. Now, some regions, they're good at this. I mean, they can really get along, but others specifically don't do a good job of regional development. And so our community builders, what that does is it creates the relationship first amongst people, amongst your community. It doesn't look at the traditional leadership. It doesn't look at the organizations to do the work. It looks at the people to do the work. So community builders looks at the regional economy. It looks at your commuting patterns. It's keeping it strong. And so we invite those economies to the regional economy to build the relationship. We build the relationship first with the community, and we do that through site visits. We do that through community teams. We do that through the processes that we use to really inform you and get to know what the region is. We've had communities that would start to work with each other by saying, I didn't know you had that in your community. I didn't know this business was there. We've had businesses to do business with other businesses because they didn't know a business what existed within that regional economy, and they could now come and do business within the region instead of going outside of their region. And so with those relationships, you start to use the communities as their assets allow. So you build those relationships, you come together, you start working jointly with that, with one community, one regional vision. What do we look at? Now, when you're building a startup community, you want to look at this because entrepreneurs don't care where their business comes from. Entrepreneurs don't care where their customers live. Entrepreneurs just need a customer base. Some customers will be worldwide. Other customers will be very, very local within your own community. Other customers, though, if you look at your main street, where do your customers come? We've got different counties, different communities from around the region. And so you want to keep those strong. So the community builders process really opens up a very cooperative and an open economy for all of the people to build those relationships to come together.
We have community builders, just a couple of the little details that go along with that is that it's fabulous because it's bottoms up. We invite people who are like the paid people to be included. But really, as Frank was saying, it makes a big difference when you have just local people who are involved in your community development. We want people, you know, if you've listened to us, that we're big on inclusion. We're big on anybody who wants to participate in the community, to be a spark plug, to be a community spark plug, to be part of any process. And community builders is a great way to introduce people who may not be part of your usual folks who are involved in any kind of activities or events or in your community. So community builders, the process is a number of months long. We encourage you to do it several years in a row so that more and more people get involved, more and more people talk about all the really cool things that happen in your communities. We have a number of different components. We have developed this over 30 some years of community engagement. So if you want to know details of this, then we encourage you to get a hold of us at frank@ghorizons.com or kim@ghorizons.com. It is incredibly fun. It is incredibly rewarding. Frank has an experience early on in a 5-county region who did community builders that they developed 250 jobs in the next several years after they did this process, used this technique. So it's not a workshop. It's not where, we drop in for a couple of hours and boom, this wonderful thing happens. But by doing that multiple times, the magic that is present in rural communities and all of the wonderful treasures is illuminated by community builders and what we help the people who live there uncover and discover.
So think about your dating life. All right, here we are. Yeah, think about your dating life. Think about did you yeah, I had a good example, but think about your dating life, because you didn't become a relationship right away. You had to learn about the other person through learning about the other person. And that is building a relationship. So think about how you become friends with somebody. Think about how you discovered your spouse. Think about how you discovered your significant other. You actually had to learn how to build that relationship. You had to learn who they were, what they liked, what they didn't like, what were their strengths, what were their weaknesses, what you like about them, what you don't like about them. That's all about building a relationship. Now, take that to a regional economy. Are you doing the same thing with your communities? Or are you still saying, we don't like that community because they stole our school? We don't like that community because they always beat us in football. We don't like that community because name your poison. There is always something there, but it's about the community. It's not about the people in it. It's about the community. So when you start to interact with people in that community on this type of a level, you build relationships with the people, which then takes away the wall of the community. It's magic that will happen. That's the magic of community builders.
And
so if you want to know about that more, give us a call, give us a contact, let us know. We'd be happy to help you.
So that concludes our Institute week. And so you can review all of the different facets that we've talked about this week. But next week, we'll be starting afresh. And we hope that you join us every day, Monday through Friday at 11:30 Central Daylight Time on Facebook or YouTube at Rural Community Solutions, or you can catch a podcast later on at Think Like an Entrepreneur, Become a Spark Plug. And you can find that at anchor.fm/Frank Spillers. For now, we wish you a fabulous weekend. We hope you have a great time. And we thank you for tuning in to Rural Community Solutions.
And if you have an issue within your community that you would like for us to address through one of our shows, give us an email or make a comment about what type of issue your community is going through that we might be able to help you. So until next week, we will see you later.
Have a great weekend.